you're building a bus, no rust is a must, girl. When you're building a bus, better watch for the rust, girl. You got to exhaust your water heater, you gotta cut a hole in your bus. I feel what you're laying down, you're putting walls up all around in your bus. Yeah, you're building a bus, girl, better watch for that rust. No rust is a must, girl. Is this the bus music festival? Alright. Ride across this country into the starlight. 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
This week was super productive. We covered our wheel wells. We finished all of the plumbing that we can finish at this point. We put up almost all of the walls that will be in the bus, and we also made our bed frame.
Yeah, and just think how much more we could have got done if I didn't waste all that time on that amazing, amazing bus building song. I mean, whoo, that was refined.
We spent all week writing that song.
Or all 30 seconds before the camera rolled.
Just kidding, there was no prep for that. The first thing that we accomplished this week was to cover the wheel wells and insulate them. This needed to be done ever since we did our subfloor, and we've just been ignoring it. So we buttoned that up this week. The first thing was to cover the wheel wells in insulation, because if you don't do that, you're just going to be bleeding heat and maybe AC out of the wheel wells, because they're just metal and they go right to the outside. So we cut the insulation to fit over top of them and secured it all on. Next was to cut pieces of our leftover subfloor material. This is just the 3/4 inch that we used on top of our other floor insulation when we did all of that. We had some scraps left over, so we cut those pieces for the top and sides, and then it was more angle finding. This whole project I've learned how to find angles, and so I got on my table saw, I found the angle that the two boards needed to meet, because I didn't want to build a box around the wheel well and just waste space. So I wanted the wood to sit right on the existing wheel well and insulation. So we had to find the angle that those two boards met at, found that, set the table saw to that angle, and then ran them through. They all met nice and flush, so that was the goal. And then we could put pocket holes into it and secure them together. Once that was done, we took that cover, put it onto another piece of the 3/4 inch, traced the end of it, and then cut that piece so the end would fit just perfectly within the cover that was already made. Everything gets secured together, it gets secured to the floor, so now the wheel wells are insulated and they're covered with that thick 3/4 inch ply. So they're good to go now. They match the rest of the flooring, they're covered, they're ready to get cabinets built over top of them. The last piece of this, which is just buttoning up a few loose ends, was to use gaps and cracks around the edges of where the insulation meets the subfloor, just to fill in some of that insulation gap and make sure that everything was ready to go to get the walls on.
Last week we ran a couple of our PEX lines preparing for the freshwater install this week. Our first big step on that was putting in the water heater, which gets you to the question, propane or electric. We've had one of each in our van and our bus, but this one has both. It's so cool. I wish I had done a bit more research on our bus build to know that was an option, because I think I definitely would have went with it, because if your power was low, you didn't have much sun, you can just switch to propane. Either way, this one has both. Super awesome. But the first step in getting that installed was cutting another hole in the bus.
A big hole in the side of the bus, which was extra scary. we realized that the size of this water heater was exactly the space of our ribs on the side of the frame. So we pushed it in, realized that it could go right in between these two vertical frame pieces, but there was a unistrut running horizontally in front. So the first step was to use an angle grinder to cut that piece out. Once that was done, we were able to push the heater in, trace around the outside of it so that we knew where to make our cuts. But we couldn't cut from the inside because the jigsaw wouldn't fit into that space. It wouldn't go over the framing on the interior. So we had to drill out the corners of the square, then go on the outside of the bus and use the jigsaw to cut out that shape. Once we did that, we slid the heater into the hole from the inside out, and it fit.
Yeah, once again, these are always scary cuts. Fortunately, things like the fans and these water heaters usually have a pretty good overlay, so if you have to go a little wide because you didn't get it perfectly square, there's a little bit of a margin for error, but you still want to get it as close as possible.
We did pretty good with this cut. We had to trim a little bit off the sides, but once we pushed it through, it was the perfect size. It was really flush around the edges. So the next step was to screw the heater in through the exterior face. So once that was secured in place, it was time to put the door onto the heater. This heater has to vent externally, so this is an absolutely necessary thing to have. We discovered that this door is sold separately from the heater, which is endlessly annoying.
Along with everything.
Yes, the switches are sold separately, the door is sold separately. There's two switches you need.
Thanks a lot, guys.
It's very annoying, but so far we like the heater besides that element of it.
Yeah.
So we bought the door separately, we got that, put that onto the outside, secured it to the bus. We used some butyl tape around the edge of the door just for some extra security of ensuring that there are no leaks. And then from there, we caulked the outside and everything was good to go. I think it looks really great. It almost looks stock to the bus because it is the exact same color as the paint.
Yeah, the color is spot on and it looks great. And we also chalked the back with some blocks that we screwed into the floor so that thing can't move at all. The next step in the system was to cinch down all the clamps that go on your PEX fittings. You need a special tool for this, and his name is Mateo. So we brought him in. Luckily, he brought his PEX tool as well because you definitely need that. Once you have that, you can then clamp all these. There's other ways to do it, but this is the system we've chose to use. It's worked really well in the past. Just remember to check all of your clamps. It's so easy to miss one or two because all of a sudden with all the elbows and T-taps and everything else, you might have like 40 or 50 of these little joints. So it's easy to miss one. But we clamped them all down. We clamped down the ones connecting both the water pump to the accumulator that then feeds into the system, to the hot water heater and everything else. And we were pretty much good to go on all that.
The next step was to set up the fresh water tank. And this gets filled from an intake on the side of the bus. We had to drill the hole for that intake, more holes in the bus. We got an external water fill hatch, and that goes in the hole. It gets secured, caulked on the outside so that it's watertight. This fill hatch gets attached to a tube, and the tube goes to the fresh water tank so that when you fill your water system from the outside of the bus, it goes right into your tank. And then we had to connect all the different tubes to the fresh water tank.
Connected to the fresh water tank on the top, you have your 1.5 inch intake, which is where you fill, and then there's a smaller tube that actually lets the air go out as the water rises in the tank. And then on the bottom you have your fresh water line that runs to your system. Right before our water pump, we put in a little screen filter that catches any debris that may be in the water just to protect your water pump long term. It's a good idea. You could put it there, you could put it before your fresh water tank. Either way, it's a good idea to have one of those. Here's a basic breakdown of the water coming into the system and traveling throughout. First thing is your fill hatch, where your water will come through a 1.5-inch tube into your freshwater tank. The small exhaust out the top lets the air out. From the bottom, you have your fresh water coming out of the hose, then going to a small screen filter before it then goes to your water pump. From there, it goes to an accumulator, which helps keep a little more pressure so you get a bit more smooth flow. From there, you're going to T-tap your cold water, one to your hot water heater, and one up that will go to both your sink and your shower. From the hot water heater, it's going to come out and you'll do a T-tap as well, one to your sink and one to your shower. And at that point, the water's coming out of your different faucets.
Then we moved on to covering over the windows that we blacked out in the last episode. So last week we blacked them all out, got them ready to be covered over, and the first step for that is insulating them. So we cut sheets of insulation that would be wedged in between the furring strips around each window. We left an air gap both in this bus and in our bus, just a really small space in between the insulation and the window so that there is some kind of airflow behind there, and that'll help just a little bit with condensation. We actually decided to black out one more section of window next to the bathroom, and this is to make the layout pretty much exactly like how our bus is set up. We went back and forth with this area, but we decided that we liked the little half window that we have next to our heater. So we blacked out that window kind of halfway, 3/4, so that it'll have the same look that our bus does. The first wall that we decided to do was the back wall, and we had to make a template for this because the wall on the edges is curved and then there's a window in the middle. It would be so hard to measure that out. So we just grabbed some cardboard and tape and made a template of the whole back area. We decided to do beadboard on this wall just like we have in our bus. We really like the look of that. It adds a little texture to the bed area. So we took our template and placed it onto the beadboard, traced it out. Beadboard is essentially cardboard. It's so easy to cut. So we used a jigsaw, but you probably don't need anything even that strong to cut beadboard. But we cut around the edges, we cut out the hole for the window, put it up there, and screwed it in. That was our first wall. That looked so good. It added so much texture to that space. Once all of that was finished and we had all the windows covered with insulation, it was time to move on to covering everything, absolutely everything, with 1/4 inch. And there were so many measurements to take and cuts to make, and we measured and cut and cut and cut on the table saw. I spent days at the table saw just cutting pieces of 1/4 inch. And we decided to cut the walls in smaller sections instead of doing big, huge sheets of the 1/4 inch. We did this for a reason, because if there is ever a problem behind one of those walls, you want to be able to just get that piece off and not have to rip out pieces of the furniture, the bed, or the booth to get at where the issue is. If you ever had a problem with one of the windows, if you ever had a problem with the plumbing behind the wall, there was a leak or a puncture, you want to be able to just take that piece of wall off and not have to go through pulling huge pieces that are all connected up to your ceiling and your floor, and it would make it really difficult. And so we're trying to be forward thinking if there was ever a problem to make it easier on whoever gets this bus to fix it. The last piece that we had to install to finish up the back section of the bus's walls was another piece of beadboard. Beadboard is just so easy to install and it adds a lot of character to a space. When we were designing our first bus, we were looking for a way to add a little bit of texture to the area right next to the heater. It just looked a little plain. And it would have just been a green wall. There was another green wall. So beadboard is a good way to just add something different to the wall without doing anything really difficult. Now the walls for the back area of the bus, the bed area, the living room, and the kitchen were finally complete. The last walls that we made this week were for the bathroom, and we used 1/2 inch for these walls because they are in the bathroom. They're going to have to hold the FRP board and some tile on the back wall. They get red guarded, so you have to go with something a little bit thicker. We used 1/2 inch, and we went right back to making a cardboard template. We love a cardboard template.
Speak for yourself.
It's a much easier way to get crazy curves and angles without having to do any math or use any expensive tools. So we got our cardboard out, taped it along the curve, and then took it out of the bus and put it on top of our 1/2 inch ply, traced it out, cut it, and that was the moment of truth.
Yeah.
Did it fit?
See if it fits
Against the wall. The first one was perfect. You can see the smile. The first one was, mwah. Oh, it was beautiful. The second one, a little bit.
Well, you're dealing with the faucet fixture, and the angle is a little bit different than the other one, actually. So it was still super close. Usually you'll have to kind of maybe cut a little bit more down. Always good to have to cut more down than cut it too small and need a whole new sheet of wood, which is not good.
That's true.
Yeah.
We finished by cutting the back wall for the bathroom. We pressed everything together, made sure there were no gaps, and it looks really good. The bathroom walls turned out great. It makes it look, finally, like the bathroom. You can picture the tile, and now the ceiling is in. It looks like it's really coming together. The final major project this week was making the bed frame. This was a Savannah and Kevin project. We brought in Kevin again, and he helped me design and weld the bed frame. This was actually a lot of fun to design, and it's different than the one in our bus because we had to go over some of the plumbing that is already installed, and our closet at the end of the bed is going to be a little bit different.
Right.
But we used metal that we had kind of laying around, scrap pieces of angle and 1x2, welded all of that together. We welded the pieces together outside of the bus and then brought it in and assembled it because the full structure itself is too big to bring into the bus. So it had to be assembled inside. But once we did that, welded it all together, that was our first piece of furniture in combination with having all the walls up and the beadboard on the back wall. That felt like a leap forward.
Yeah, it's starting to take shape, and you can, once again, you start to see what it's actually going to look like, and it's exciting because it's moving pretty fast.
We just finished up a really long, really warm day in the bus making the bed frame. Thanks, bud. It is finally finished, and we decided to make our bed frame out of metal for a few reasons. One is that we have the ability to do it. I'm learning to weld, my dad is a welder, he's teaching me, and we just have access to a lot of metal, and we can. So it was a fun project to do. Number two is that by making it out of metal, we felt that we could use less supports, it would take up less space, and be just as strong as if we made it out of wood. Just as far as space goes, you can use less metal for the same amount of strength, and that's always a bonus in a small space. Third is that when you put wood in contact with wood, there's always a chance that it's going to start squeaking when you drive down the road. We have a lot of squeaking in our bus, so with this project we are trying to reduce the amount of wood on wood contact that we have going on, and the bed frame would be a place with a lot of contact. So by making it out of metal, we ensure that there's no squeaking going on, at least in this area.
Right now we're securing the water tank in. We're using just a couple wood blocks that we're going to screw into the floor to kind of frame it out, as well as these straps that would be connected to these latches that are screwed in the floor, so the tank can't go anywhere.
Week 7 is finished. It feels like the wheels are in motion and we are really moving along now.
Yeah, it feels like we are moving pretty fast, and I'm just trying to now keep focused to not think we're way ahead of schedule, because it can feel like that, but I want to keep that long timeline goal kind of where it is, so I don't feel any stress to have to get it done in like, 3 more weeks or something like that.
We were feeling pretty good this week. There were no major mishaps, so cross your fingers for us and next week goes just as smoothly.
Yeah.
Next week, as always, we have big plans. More structures are going in the bus, like cabinets and closets and couches.
Tigers and bears and lions.
Right, planes and trains.
Automobiles.
Right.
Yeah, all those sort of things.
All those things are going in the bus next week. Do all those things that you do on the internet, and we will see you next week.
Later.